The calendar invitation appeared at 9:40 a.m. on a Tuesday. Subject line, Performance Review, Avery Coleson. Scheduled for 3 p.m. that same afternoon. No agenda attached. No preliminary email. I stared at the notification for exactly 3 seconds before understanding what it meant. In 12 years at Wayfair Technologies, I'd never received a performance review scheduled with 4 business days' notice, let alone 5 hours. The company policy manual specified a minimum 2-week notification period with documented objectives and self-assessment forms. This wasn't a review. This was an execution. I'm a database performance engineer. Most people don't know what that means, and the ones who do usually find it boring. I optimize query patterns, manage indexing strategies, and ensure that when 500,000 users hit our e-commerce platform simultaneously during a flash sale, the system doesn't collapse into smoking rubble. Nobody notices when I do my job correctly. Everyone notices within seconds when something breaks. The invitation had been building toward me for 3 months. I'd felt it the way you feel a pressure system moving in before a storm, subtle shifts in wind direction, changes in how people made eye contact in meetings, the particular silence that followed certain questions I asked. At 2:47 p.m., I saved my current work and locked my workstation. The walk from my desk to the executive conference room on the 9th floor takes approximately 4 minutes. I gave myself 6, moving through the corridors with deliberate calm, my laptop bag over one shoulder and a manila folder containing 3 months of documentation tucked under my arm. The 9th floor was different that afternoon. Too quiet, even for executive territory. The usual low hum of phone conversations and keyboard clicks had been replaced by something that felt like held breath. I noticed it immediately but kept walking. As I approached the conference room, I saw them through the glass walls. 3 people I didn't recognize, all wearing dark suits that had the particular cut of external professionals. Not Wayfair employees. One was setting up recording equipment. Another was arranging documents on the table in neat stacks. The third looked up as I reached the door and made direct eye contact. She was in her mid-50s, gray hair pulled back, with the kind of face that suggested she'd spent decades asking questions people didn't want to answer. I stopped. My hand was on the door handle, but I didn't push. The woman stood and walked to the door herself, opening it from the inside. Ms. Coleson? Yes. I'm Helen Ortega. I'm with the Federal Trade Commission's Division of Enforcement. These are my colleagues, Special Investigators Yoon and Castellano. We'd like to ask you some questions about your work at Wayfair Technologies. This is not the meeting you were expecting. I glanced past her shoulder at the conference room where I was supposed to be terminated. The calendar invitation still glowed on the screen mounted to the wall, my name displayed in 48-point font. Am I required to answer your questions? Not required. But we'd appreciate your cooperation. We've been reviewing certain technical practices at Wayfair for the past 6 weeks. Your name has come up repeatedly in our investigation, almost always in the context of documented objections to specific decisions. I looked at the recording equipment, then back at Ortega. I'd like to confirm my status before we proceed. You're a witness, Ms. Coleson. Not a subject. We're very clear about that distinction. I stepped into the room. The door closed behind me with a soft click. Castellano gestured to a chair facing the 3 of them across the polished table. I sat, placing my folder in front of me but leaving it closed. Yoon activated the recording equipment and stated the date, time, location, and names of everyone present. His voice was precise, almost mechanical in its formality. Ortega leaned forward slightly. Ms. Coleson, can you describe your role at Wayfair Technologies? I'm a senior database performance engineer. I've held that position for 8 years. Before that, I was a junior engineer in the same department for 4 years. And what does that role entail? I ensure that our database systems operate efficiently and reliably under load. I write and optimize queries, design indexing strategies, monitor performance metrics, and implement caching solutions. I also review architectural decisions that might impact database performance and provide technical guidance to development teams. Does your role include any regulatory or compliance responsibilities? Not explicitly. But performance engineering intersects with data integrity, which has compliance implications. If a database operation fails or produces incorrect results due to performance shortcuts, that can violate various regulations depending on the data involved. How would you characterize the culture around performance and compliance at Wayfair? I paused, choosing my words carefully. There's significant pressure to prioritize feature velocity over technical rigor. Teams are measured primarily on delivery speed and user engagement metrics. Performance concerns are often framed as obstacles to progress rather than safeguards. Ortega made a note. Can you give us a specific example? 3 months ago, the product team wanted to implement a new recommendation algorithm. It required joining customer purchase history with real-time browsing behavior across 7 different data tables. I ran preliminary tests and determined that the query pattern would cause response time degradation of approximately 40% during peak traffic hours. I documented this in a technical review memo and recommended an alternative architecture that would achieve the same functionality with better performance. What was the response? The product director, Kyle Brennan, told me the feature was a strategic priority and that I needed to be more flexible. He said the team had tight deadlines and that perfect technical solutions shouldn't block business value. Did you escalate your concerns? I sent a follow-up email to Brennan and CC'd the VP of Engineering, Stephanie Rourke. I outlined the specific performance risks and included benchmark data from my testing environment. I stated that I couldn't approve the implementation in its current form. And then? Brennan responded by email that he appreciated my input but that the decision had been made at the executive level. The feature launched 2 weeks later. Response times increased by 38% during the following flash sale. The site crashed for 47 minutes. We lost approximately $2 million in revenue during the outage. Castellano spoke for the first time. Did anyone acknowledge that you'd predicted this outcome? No. The post-mortem report attributed the crash to unexpected load patterns and insufficient capacity planning. My original memo wasn't referenced. Ortega opened one of the folders in front of her and slid a document across the table. We obtained this through a subpoena. It's an internal email from Brennan to Rourke, dated 4 days after the crash. Have you seen it before? I scanned the page. My name appeared in the 3rd paragraph. Avery continues to be overly risk-averse and resistant to innovation. Her constant objections are creating bottlenecks in our development pipeline. I recommend we find someone more aligned with our velocity-first culture. No, I said. I haven't seen this. 2 weeks after that email, you were removed from the recommendation algorithm project. Is that correct? Yes. Brennan assigned the performance work to Zara Whitfield, a junior engineer with 9 months of experience. He told the team that Whitfield was more data-driven than I was and that fresh perspectives would improve our outcomes. Yoon leaned forward. Did you object to being removed? I didn't object to Brennan directly. But I sent an email to Rourke requesting clarification about my role and responsibilities. I asked whether I was still expected to provide performance oversight for production systems if my recommendations could be overridden without technical justification. What response did you receive? Rourke scheduled a one-on-one meeting. She told me that I was valued but that I needed to work on my communication style. She said that raising concerns was important but that I should frame them more positively and focus on solutions rather than problems. She suggested that my resistance to the recommendation algorithm had created perception issues with the product team. Ortega made another note. How did you respond? I said I understood. I also said that I would continue to document performance risks in writing whenever I identified them, regardless of whether those concerns were popular. And did you? Yes. Castellano pulled out another document. We have records of 17 separate technical memos you submitted over the following 10 weeks. Each one documented a specific performance or data integrity risk. Each one was either ignored or explicitly overridden. Is that accurate? Yes. Walk us through the most serious incidents. I opened my folder and pulled out my own copies of the same memos they'd subpoenaed. The pages were organized chronologically with color-coded tabs. The first major incident occurred 6 weeks ago. The marketing team wanted to implement real-time personalization for email campaigns. The proposed solution involved querying customer behavior data every time someone opened an email, generating thousands of concurrent database connections. I calculated that this would exceed our connection pool capacity by a factor of 3 during typical morning hours when email open rates peak. What did you recommend? A batch processing approach. Generate personalization data overnight and cache it for email delivery. functionally identical from the user perspective, dramatically lower database load. Response? Brennan said that overnight processing wasn't truly real-time and that real-time was a key selling point for the marketing VP. He told me to increase the connection pool capacity instead. Did you? I explained that increasing the connection pool wouldn't solve the underlying problem. Database connections aren't free resources, each one consumes memory and processing capacity. Beyond a certain threshold, adding more connections actually degrades performance because the database spends more time managing connections than processing queries. I recommended against it. What happened? Brennan escalated to Rourke. Rourke asked me to implement the connection pool increase as a temporary measure while we monitored the situation. I complied but documented my objection in writing. Yoon interrupted. Did the system fail? Not immediately. The increased load caused gradual performance degradation over 3 weeks. Response times increased from an average of 200 milliseconds to nearly 2 seconds. Customer complaints about site slowness increased by 400%. The connection pool eventually saturated during a promotional event, causing a cascade failure across multiple services. Total downtime was 93 minutes. Ortega's expression didn't change, but something in her posture sharpened. Revenue impact? Approximately $4 million. Plus reputational damage that's harder to quantify. Postmortem attribution? Infrastructure limitations and unexpected traffic patterns. Castellano turned to a marked page in his folder. We have an email from Brennan to the engineering leadership team dated 2 days after that outage. He wrote, and I quote, "We need to move faster on infrastructure scaling. Our current performance team is too focused on theoretical problems and not enough on practical solutions. Avery's conservative estimates are holding us back." Did you see this email? No. 5 days later, you were removed from 3 additional projects and reassigned to legacy system maintenance. Correct? Correct. Ortega folded her hands on the table. Ms. Coleson, I want to be very clear about something. The Federal Trade Commission has been investigating Wayfair Technologies for potential violations of consumer protection regulations, specifically regarding false advertising and deceptive business practices. Our investigation began after we received multiple consumer complaints about product recommendations that appeared to be manipulated for commercial benefit rather than genuine personalization. She paused, letting that sink in. During our investigation, we discovered that many of the technical systems you flagged as problematic were also producing data integrity issues. The recommendation algorithm you objected to wasn't just slow, it was occasionally showing customers products they'd already purchased or products from categories they'd explicitly filtered out. The real-time email personalization was sending promotional codes that had already expired or offering discounts on items that were out of stock. I kept my face neutral, but my pulse accelerated. These errors constituted false advertising under FTC regulations. They also violated Wayfair's own stated privacy and personalization policies. We estimate that approximately 40,000 customers received materially false or misleading marketing communications over a 10-week period. Yoon added, and we found your memos predicting many of these exact problems. You warned that insufficient testing and rushed implementation would lead to data inconsistencies. You were correct. Ortega continued. What we need to understand is the decision-making process that led to these violations. We need to know who was aware of the risks, who chose to proceed anyway, and who attempted to silence or sideline the people raising concerns. I can document all of that, I said. We know. That's why you're here as a witness rather than at the meeting you were scheduled for. She gestured to the calendar invitation still glowing on the wall screen. We've been monitoring Wayfair's internal communications for the past 3 weeks under seal. When we saw that Brennan had scheduled your termination for today, we accelerated our timeline. Is this conversation being documented for the record? Yes. Audio and video recording, plus written transcription. You'll receive a copy. I nodded slowly. Then I'll need to walk you through the pattern systematically. There are 11 distinct incidents where I flagged technical risks that directly correlate with consumer protection violations. They escalate in severity. Please proceed. I pulled out the second tab in my folder. Incident 3 occurred 7 weeks ago. The product team wanted to implement dynamic pricing for clearance items. The system was designed to adjust prices in real time based on inventory levels and demand signals. I reviewed the code and discovered that the pricing algorithm had a rounding error in its calculation logic. What kind of error? It would occasionally round prices up instead of down when inventory fell below certain thresholds. For example, an item advertised as up to 70% off might actually show only 68% off due to the rounding error. The difference was usually small, a few dollars per item, but it was technically false advertising. Did you report this? I filed a detailed bug report and marked it as high priority. I explained that pricing accuracy was a legal requirement and that we needed to fix the rounding logic before launch. Response? Brennan marked it as low priority and deferred it to the next sprint cycle. He said that small pricing variations were acceptable and that perfect accuracy wasn't worth delaying the feature. He told me I was being pedantic. Did the feature launch with the bug? Yes. It ran for 4 weeks before someone in customer service noticed that advertised discounts weren't matching actual prices. The bug affected approximately 12,000 transactions. Castellano made a note. Did Wayfair issue refunds? Partial refunds to customers who complained. No proactive notification to other affected customers. The bug fix was deployed quietly without acknowledgement of the error. Ortega's pen moved across her notepad in quick, efficient strokes. Next incident. Incident 4 involved the customer review system. Product management wanted to boost engagement metrics by showing similar reviews from other products in the same category. I reviewed the implementation and found that the similarity algorithm was pulling reviews from products that customers hadn't actually purchased. Explain the significance. If you're reading reviews for a blender, the system might show you a review that says "great product," exactly as described, but that review was actually written about a completely different blender from a different manufacturer. The review text would appear under the current product without clear indication that it came from elsewhere. That's deceptive. Yes. I flagged it immediately and recommended that we only show reviews for the specific product being viewed, or at minimum, clearly label cross-product reviews with prominent disclaimers. Response? Brennan said that other e-commerce sites used similar approaches and that it was an industry-standard practice. He told me that boosting review counts would improve conversion rates and that customer experience research showed people trusted products with more reviews. Did you escalate? I sent an email to Rourke and CC'd the legal team. I specifically stated that the practice could be considered deceptive under FTC guidelines and that we needed legal review before launch. What happened? The legal team responded that they'd review the implementation. But the feature launched 3 days later, before legal had completed their assessment. When I asked about the status, I was told that legal had given verbal approval. I requested written confirmation of that approval. I never received it. Yoon looked up sharply. You're saying the legal team's approval was misrepresented? I'm saying I was told verbal approval was given, but I never saw documentation of it, and when I asked for documentation, my requests were ignored. Ortega made a mark on her notepad that looked more emphatic than her previous notes. We'll need to follow up on that specific claim. Continue. I turned to the next tab. Incident 5 was the inventory accuracy problem. The warehouse management system and the website inventory system weren't properly synchronized. There was a lag of up to 40 minutes between when an item sold out in the warehouse and when it showed as unavailable on the website. That seems like a technical limitation rather than a decision. It was fixable. I proposed a solution that would reduce the lag to under 60 seconds by implementing a message queue system. The cost was approximately $15,000 in cloud infrastructure and 40 hours of development time. Was it approved? No. Brennan said the current system was good enough and that customers understood that inventory could change during checkout. I pointed out that we were advertising items as in stock when they'd already sold out, which constituted false advertising. He said that was an overreaction. Did customers actually purchase items that were out of stock? Yes. Approximately 200 transactions per week were placed for items that were no longer available. Customers received cancellation emails hours later, after they'd completed checkout and received confirmation. Revenue impact? Direct revenue impact was minimal since orders were canceled. Reputational impact and customer satisfaction impact were significant but not quantified in any report I saw. Castellano leaned back in his chair. Let me ask you something directly, Ms. Coleson. Why did you stay? Why keep documenting these issues when it was clear nobody was listening? I'd been waiting for that question. Because documentation creates a record. Because if something catastrophic happened, there needed to be evidence that someone had tried to prevent it. Because walking away would mean the next person in my position would face the same pressures without any historical context. Did you consider reporting these issues to external authorities before now? I considered it. But I wasn't certain that what I was seeing constituted clear violations. Many of the decisions were technically defensible even if I disagreed with them. I'm an engineer, not a lawyer. I didn't know where the line was between bad technical practice and illegal conduct. Ortega nodded slowly. That's a reasonable position. But let me clarify where that line is for you now. False advertising is illegal. Deceptive business practices are illegal. Misrepresenting product information, pricing, or availability to consumers is illegal. Based on what you've just described, Wayfair Technologies has engaged in at least 7 distinct categories of violations over the past 3 months. The weight of that statement settled over the room. The penalties for these violations can include fines of up to $43,000 per violation. Given that we're talking about tens of thousands of affected transactions, the potential liability is substantial. Additionally, individual executives who knowingly approved deceptive practices can face personal liability and potential criminal charges in severe cases. I said nothing. There was nothing to say. Yoon spoke next. We need to understand the approval chain for each decision. Who had final authority? Who overrode your objections? Who had access to your documentation and chose to proceed anyway? Brennan had direct authority over product decisions. Rourke had oversight authority and could have overridden him but generally deferred to product leadership. The executive team, VP of Product, VP of Engineering, CTO, and CEO, received weekly status reports that included my escalated concerns, though I don't know how much detail they reviewed. Did you ever communicate directly with anyone above Rourke? Once. I requested a meeting with the CTO, Oscar Langford, after the second major outage. I wanted to discuss systemic issues with our development culture and risk management practices. Did that meeting happen? No. Rourke told me that Langford was too busy and that I should work through her. She said that going over her head would damage our working relationship and reflect poorly on my judgment. Ortega and Castellano exchanged a glance that I couldn't quite read. Ms. Coleson, Ortega said carefully, we have evidence that Langford personally approved at least 3 of the projects you flagged, including the recommendation algorithm and the dynamic pricing system. His approval emails include language suggesting he was aware of your objections and chose to proceed anyway. My hands tightened on the edge of the folder. I wasn't aware of that. We didn't think you were. That's part of what we're documenting, not just the violations themselves, but the deliberate efforts to compartmentalize information and prevent oversight. She pulled out another document and slid it across the table. This is an email from Brennan to Langford dated 6 days ago. It's the internal approval for your termination. The stated reason is inability to adapt to fast-paced environment and repeated resistance to strategic initiatives. Would you characterize that as accurate? No. I'd characterize it as retaliation for documented objections to practices that violated consumer protection regulations. So would we. Ortega stood and walked to the window, looking down at the Wayfair campus spread out below. Here's what's going to happen next. We're going to spend the rest of this afternoon taking your detailed statement about each incident. We'll need documentation, email records, technical memos, and anything else you have. We'll also need you to identify other employees who might have relevant information. She turned back to face me. After that, we're going to serve formal document preservation orders on Wayfair's executive team. We'll also be conducting interviews with Brennan, Rourke, Langford, and potentially others. Those individuals will have the right to legal representation. You, as a witness, are protected under federal whistleblower statutes. That means Wayfair cannot legally terminate you, demote you, or retaliate against you in any way for cooperating with this investigation. The meeting scheduled for 3 p.m. will not be happening. We've already notified Wayfair's legal counsel that you're cooperating with a federal investigation and that any personnel actions taken against you will be considered potential witness tampering. We've also requested that today's scheduled meeting be cancelled immediately. As if on cue, a sharp knock sounded at the door. Ortega crossed the room and opened it. Brennan stood in the hallway, his face flushed, his posture rigid with barely controlled anger. I need to speak with Ms. Coleson immediately. She has a scheduled meeting. Ms. Coleson is currently providing testimony to a federal investigation. Your meeting has been cancelled. Brennan's eyes flicked past Ortega to where I sat at the table, then to the recording equipment, then to the FTC identification badges that Yoon and Castellano wore clipped to their jackets. What investigation? I haven't been notified of any. You're being notified now. I'm Helen Ortega, Federal Trade Commission Division of Enforcement. We're conducting an investigation into potential consumer protection violations at Wayfair Technologies. Ms. Coleson is a material witness. If you'd like to discuss the scope of our investigation, I'd suggest you contact your legal counsel. This is highly irregular. We have policies for external investigations, and we have jurisdiction under federal law, which supersedes your internal policies. We've already coordinated with your legal department. They're expecting you to check in with them immediately. Brennan's jaw worked silently for a moment. His gaze returned to me, and I saw something flicker in his expression, not quite fear, but recognition. The recognition of someone who had just understood that the power dynamic had shifted in a way that couldn't be easily reversed. We'll need to reschedule Ms. Coulson's review for. There will be no rescheduling. Any personnel action involving Ms. Coulson requires prior approval from FTC legal counsel for the duration of this investigation. That's non-negotiable. Ortega closed the door, leaving Brennan standing in the hallway. Through the glass wall, I watched him pull out his phone and dial. His free hand raked through his hair as he paced in tight circles. Within 30 seconds, 2 other executives appeared, Rourke and someone from legal. They formed a tight cluster, voices low but urgent. Ortega returned to her seat. Let's continue. You mentioned 11 incidents total. We've covered 5. Walk me through the remaining 6, starting with the most recent. For the next 4 hours, I documented everything. Every memo, every warning, every override. The authentication bypass that Brennan had approved despite my security concerns. The data retention policy violations that Rourke had dismissed as technical minutiae. The A/B testing framework that showed different prices to different customers without disclosure. The analytics tracking that violated stated privacy policies. Yoon and Castellano asked hundreds of questions, clarifying timelines, confirming details, cross-referencing my testimony against documents they'd already subpoenaed. The process was exhaustive and meticulous. At 6:47 p.m., Ortega finally closed her folder. Thank you, Ms. Coulson. This has been extremely productive. We'll need you to remain available for follow-up questions, but for now, you're free to go. What should I do tomorrow? Do I report to work as normal? Yes. Continue your normal duties. Don't discuss this investigation with colleagues unless they're directly contacted by our team. If anyone from Wayfair management attempts to question you about today's events or pressures you to change your testimony, report it to us immediately. She handed me a business card with her direct contact information. One more thing, she added. You should expect the environment at Wayfair to change significantly over the next few weeks. People will be nervous. Rumors will spread. Some individuals may become hostile. If you feel unsafe or if the situation becomes untenable, contact us immediately. I took the card and slid it into my laptop bag alongside my folder of documentation. When I left the conference room, the 9th floor was nearly empty. The executive assistants had gone home. The lights in several offices were dark. But I could see small clusters of people gathered in other conference rooms, their body language tense and urgent. The elevator ride down was silent. I shared it with a product manager I vaguely recognized, someone from a different division. He glanced at me, then at his phone, then back at me with an expression that suggested he'd just connected my face to whatever rumors were already circulating. When the doors opened on the 3rd floor, I stepped out into a different world than the one I'd left 4 hours earlier. The usual end-of-day bustle had been replaced by an atmosphere of controlled chaos. People stood in small groups, speaking in hushed tones. I caught fragments of conversation as I walked past. Federal investigators. Cancelled at the last minute. Legal department is losing their minds. My desk was exactly as I'd left it. Monitor still locked, coffee cup still half full, keyboard still at the precise angle I preferred. Everything normal except for the notification banner that appeared when I woke the screen. The calendar invitation for my 3 p.m. performance review had been deleted. In its place was a brief message from Wayfair's legal department: all personnel actions regarding Avery Coleson are suspended pending external review. Direct all inquiries to General Counsel. I sat down and logged into my email. 347 new messages, most of them automated alerts and system notifications. But one stood out, sent at 4:23 p.m. from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line read, "Performance concerns, response times doubled." I opened it. It was from the Director of Infrastructure, someone 2 levels above me in the organizational chart. The message was brief and professional, but I could read the subtext clearly. "Avery, we're experiencing significant performance degradation across multiple systems that were modified during your reassignment to legacy maintenance. Response times have approximately doubled since Whitfield took over optimization work. We need your expertise to diagnose and resolve these issues as quickly as possible. Please treat this as highest priority." I read it twice, then closed it without replying. Through the window behind my desk, the executive conference rooms on the 9th floor glowed late into the evening. Figures moved behind glass walls, their shadows oversized and restless. My phone buzzed. A text from a former teammate I'd worked with for 6 years before the reassignments began. "Are you okay? People say the FTC was here. Everyone's panicking." "I'm fine," I wrote back. "Can't discuss details. Everything's documented." The typing dots appeared, vanished, then returned. "Good. Some of us have been keeping our own records too. Just in case." I stared at that message longer than I expected. Not relief, something quieter. The realization I hadn't been as alone as I'd thought. Another text followed. "Brennan and Rourke just got pulled into Langford's office. No one's seen them come out." I reopened my folder and reviewed the 17 memos I'd submitted over 3 months. Each one a refusal to let expedience overwrite reality. Each one a small bet that someone, eventually, would care. At 7:30, I shut down my workstation and left. The parking lot was half full, lights burning across multiple floors. That morning, I'd worried about a 5-hour termination notice. It felt almost quaint now. At home, I made tea and opened a blank document. Supplementary documentation, additional incidents. I wrote for 2 hours, methodical and precise. When I closed the laptop, I felt clarity, not vindication, but the certainty that the pattern was finally visible. One last text before bed, they're both on administrative leave. Announcement tomorrow. Holy shit. Documentation matters more, I replied. I set my alarm for 6. Systems still needed monitoring. That had always been the job. The memos rested on my nightstand, bureaucratic resistance turned evidence. The only difference now was that when I said something might break, people had a reason to believe me. The documentation had done its work. The reckoning had begun.